All right, happy Tuesday afternoon, guys, or Wednesday morning if you're doing this in plus time. One thing I want to go over before we get started on today's notes is just a review of yesterday's definition of slope. We are going to keep talking about this consistently because you can't really work with slope if you don't know what slope means. So, slope is a rate written as a fraction where you find the change in y over the change in x. So this is going to show us the steepness of a line when looking at a graph or a ramp or a slide, or it's going to tell us the relationship between two things when we're looking at a word problem. Keeping in mind that delta means change, so it stands for change in y over change in x. Now, we've talked about the fact that our brains are so trained to do x before y because we've been learning coordinates for the past 5 years that when we're doing slope, we really have to slow down to just remember ourselves that in this situation, y is going to come on top of x. It's a challenge for kids every year. It's not that they don't know it, they just forget to do it. So please make sure you guys are slowing down and reminding yourself that in the situations of slope, y comes on top of x. Okay, now let's get to what we did in class today. So today our target in class was to learn how to find slope in 2 additional ways. One was finding slope from points, and the second was finding slope from a word problem. So let's go ahead and start out with our 2 points. We had actually kind of already covered this on Monday, except our points weren't given to us in points. They were either given to us in graphs or tables. So we have a couple options here on how to solve slope from 2 points. One, you could graph the points and count your slope. Count up and over. The second thing you could do, which might be a little bit easier, especially if you don't have graph paper on hand, is to turn your points into a table. So I'm going to go ahead and make my XY table here. My first point is -2, -4, and my second point, doesn't even look like a 2, is 2, -2. And when we did our slope from tables, we learned that all you have to do is find a pattern for your x and a pattern for our y's. So I'm going to come over here to my x, and I'm just going to start here. And so I need to find how I get from -2 to +2. So one way to do that is just to count up. -2, so I'm counting from there, would be -1, 0, 1, 2. So I counted up 4. Now, you guys can always check this, which I, as a math teacher, strongly recommend. Plug -2 plus 4 into your calculator, and that should give you this number. That's what you're determining here, that my first number plus this should give me my second number. If it doesn't work, I'm guessing your sign is wrong. Try switching that and doing it again. Okay, so I know my change in x is 4. So now let's do our y. So over here, I need to count from -4 to -2. So I go -3, -2. So I definitely have a change in 2. And I know that I was counting up by 2s because my numbers were getting less negative. But again, if you weren't sure if this was supposed to be a +2 or -2, then just try one. Let's say we thought it was +2. Then I'm going to take my calculator. I'm going to plug this into my calculator, -4 plus 2, and I should get this number. If I don't, more than likely your issue is just your sign. Try switching that, plugging it into your calculator again, and it should work. So I now have my change in x and my change in y. So now I'm going to slow down, very matrix style. Here's going to slow down. And I'm going to remind myself that, yes, things here are written as x, y, but that's because they're coordinates. But when I do slope, I have to do y on top of x. So now I've got 2 over 4. My x values changed by 4, and my y values changed by 2. Now I can simplify this down to 1/2. 2/4 is fine, and it won't be wrong on a quiz or a test, but typically with fractions we like to reduce. Don't change them to decimals. Rates are a fraction, so we want to leave them as fractions. So hopefully this made sense. If it didn't, guys, please find a time to come talk to me or Miss Litzel. Don't get behind. Okay, next one, we are finding slope from a word problem. And I don't know if you guys realize this, but we've been practicing this a lot when we've been writing our equations. Because if you remember, slope is just a rate. And we've been asking this question to you guys for days now. What's the rate in the word problem? What's the rate in the word problem? So now we're just going to kind of change that question a little bit to what's the slope in the word problem? And since slope means rate, it's the same question. So I have kind of several things to choose from here. I've got $13 for a large pizza, and then I've got $3 for every 2 toppings. I'll tell you these words here, for every, are very, very helpful when finding your slope. Another word you might see a lot when finding slope is per. So here, this is kind of my fraction. For every or per are going to kind of indicate my fraction bar. So I pay $3 for every 2 toppings. So I need to write that as a rate, which needs to be written as a fraction. So I'm going to go ahead and write out my rate, and I'm going to keep my units on it just so that it helps me to find what my X and Y are. So my $3 and then my 2 toppings, and I'm just going to abbreviate with top. So $3 per 2 toppings. The reason I left my units on there is because we've been asking you guys the question a lot, what's your X stand for and what's your Y stand for? And in those situations, we're not looking for numbers, we're looking for units. Now, since I know my Y is on top of my fraction, I see that dollars is on top. So Y is equal to dollars. X is located on the bottom of my fraction. So if I look at the bottom of my fraction, my units were toppings. This might seem like a pretty small piece in math, but it's going to become very, very important as we continue through this chapter. So the better you guys can understand it now, the more luck you will have with future concepts. Okay, so that's what we did in class today. So your foldables should now be fully filled out. Please don't use this. This is going to be something that you guys can easily study from for a quiz, test, or even to just help you guys out in class. If you're doing this on Tuesday night, have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. If you're doing this during plus time, I will see you guys in a little bit.